Okay, so recording looks fine. Levels look fine. Every episode starts with a person introducing themselves. So they just say, I'm blah and I blah. So however you want to phrase it, what you teach, your most recent book, however you want to phrase your elevator speech for who you are, feel free to do it.
Great. I'm Mark Usher. I teach the classics at the University of Vermont. Though I am housed in the Department of Geography and Geosciences, which is a fairly recent development. I'm part of the environmental program there, so I see a lot of ENVS students. I'm an affiliate member of the Gund Institute for Environment, and I have a small farm that I run with my wife, who has a flower business in addition to us raising animals.
Are all the flowers grown on site?
They are, yes. And so she does like bespoke bouquets, and her niche is kind of dried flowers. When flower season is over, that's when her flower making and flower products get into full swing. Brand new venture. So I don't want to bill it for more than it is, but we have high hopes.
Is that so? When you say dried, is it dried flower bouquets, or is she actually building permanent kind of art things, like things are being preserved, or is it really dried flower bouquets?
I mean, there's a certain impermanence to dried flowers anyway,
Yes.
but both. I mean, so she makes like wreaths out of dried flowers. She does I don't know what they're actually called. There's a word for it, but like valences with dried flowers, bouquets as well. She does like flower art. In addition, she makes like little cards with flower petals like impressed on them. I guess those aren't necessarily dried, but they're again using flowers that have been harvested or not live, fresh flowers, but are. And she also does these like little candle holders. What are they called? Votive candle things, where she glues flowers onto them, and it's absolutely beautiful. Way better than painting. Anyway.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Do you have a proper website and an Instagram to showcase all these many products?
Yeah, we have a website, but the website, as I advertise it, is more proof of life than it is interactive or a way to kind of capture a market, or certainly not. We're not influencers. So the website is there, and there is a link in the works actually to her new flower business. I'm not even sure if it's active yet because I've got a student working on it. Okay. And I don't know, it's midterm exams. I don't know how far he got on that, but and Instagram, not so much.
Okay.
We did one ironically several years ago, but then just gave up because it was disingenuous for one thing, and then it was just like too much work to even do that.
It was too much work as a joke. Like, we're doing this as a joke, and like I just can't think of enough crap to throw up there. Yeah,
exactly. And the kids got a kick out of it for a while, so that was enough.
Okay, let me. Your wife doing the flower stuff and your homestead leads me to my first question, and also the fact that you've now come from classics, working on ancient literature, and now geography department. Tell me your journey from what I assume was books and rooms and sitting staring at text to farming and animal husbandry and the geology department. How does this happen?
Right. So it definitely is still books and rooms. I mean, I haven't given up the ghost on that front at all. So I love books, I love rooms, and the research and writing part of my life is great, wonderful, and I'm happy for it. So for a long time, I kind of lived a double life. As we built our own house. Actually, it goes even back further than that. I mean, we got married when we were young. We had our children at home. We ended up homeschooling them. So it kind of became like this addictive thing, like give a mouse a cookie, and it was sort of like a challenge that it's kind of like a cynic challenge. The more you can do without, you realize, wow, I can do this myself, or. And we weren't we were ideological about it, but we weren't necessarily informed or specifically ideological. It was just like, if you can do. Yeah. And so anyway, so for a long time, I kind of lived that life, a double life, where I was farming or building our house and homesteading on the side, and then playing the academic game on the other side. And then, it was my wife's good idea, actually. Her name is Caroline. She said, like, you should write about, like, what the ancients have to say about sustainability and all these sort of things that, are all in vogue now that we've been doing for 20 years without advertising it, just because whatever, it just seems like the right thing to do or sensible to do.
It used to be this was self-published treatises about how to, compost in the back of a hippie catalog, which I grew up with, all those hippie catalogs and t-shirts. So it was a cottage industry, and now it's like big business.
Yes. I mean, the Whole Earth catalog. And I don't know if you're familiar with Scott and Helen Nearing, who were kind of like the grandpappies of the Back to the Land movement. They did it in the 30s, but then became famous for it in the 70s when everyone was thinking about going back to the land. They wrote a book called Living the Good Life. They were a big inspiration to us. They have other foibles that we didn't agree with, but they were, like, for instance, they thought raising animals was tantamount to chattel slavery. So we didn't fall into that camp, but they were just incredible, interesting people. Little intolerant, but anyway, long story short, they were influenced. Yeah, the Whole Earth catalog, 5 Acres in Independence, even before that. You ever heard of that book?
I have, yes.
I think it's M.K. Keynes or M.G. Keynes. And that went through so many editions. So we have that on our shelves. So yeah, you're right. It was this sort of like off the radar kinds of publications that were cultish that we had been reading and got us interested in the first place. So anyway,
yeah,
living that.
I have to ask, you're the one reading these books and these ancients, and you're doing this other thing. Why did it never occur to you to bring these two huge parts of your life closer together?
Yeah, I don't know, because it's kind of nice when you live somewhere where you don't work and your friends are mechanics and butchers and carpenters and not academics. Not that I have any grudge against academics. I love them. But it's nice to have another life. So apart from a career. So yeah, I kind of just like that. But then I saw the convenience of merging the two interests. So I started to write about, what the ancients have to say about living with nature cooperatively, and and I think a lot. So I wrote a book about that, Plato's Pigs, in 2020, and so since then, really, since doing the research for that book, I've kind of, I don't know, bought the farm, as it were, and become more of an environmental humanities kind of person in my research and writing. So anyway, that happened. But then the only reason, not the only reason, but the primary reason why I'm in a department of geography and geosciences is because my university closed our classics department down. Didn't eliminate it completely, but its identity as a department was nixed, and it was folded into a world languages and literature school, which is very common in larger state universities. So, but I just felt like what I was doing at that time and what I'm going to be doing for the next 10 years in writing and intellectual stuff is not going to just be about language teaching. It's going to be about, other things too. So I was headhunted by this other department, a couple of other departments actually. And so, yeah, chose to go with geography and geosciences. And I still teach all the same courses that I used to, but they like it. They like that tie-in.
Okay, there's a huge argument I see in the classics. I've always found the classics interesting. And as I was an English major, and I always liked the older literature versus the newer literature. I liked both of it. So I leaned that way, but never got a classics degree. And the classics used to be, I think it was a part for a few hundred years or maybe longer, it was a part of finishing school for the people who are, university was a place for the people who are going to become the great kings and queens and captains and captainesses of industry. Mm-hmm. If you want to fit in, you need to know these classic things because all these other people studied the classics too. All the successful people know them too. You're going to need all the references. Right. Today, it's interesting. You're writing these books. I bought a copy of How to Care About Animals, which is effectively one small piece from a very big publisher and an entire series that's kind of focused on exactly what you said, which is, some practicality that the ancients have to the modern world. Right. I can see that coming back into vogue, but I think at the same time as classics kind of melts away, this seems to be an interest in the ancients. So I guess my big question is, if somebody comes to you and says, why should I study this stuff from the ancient Greek or in ancient Greek, in Latin, or in translation, what could they possibly have to tell me about how to live my life now, thousands of years later? What is your argument you give maybe to undergrads about that?
Well, it sounds a little bit trite, but I mean, the more things change, the more they stay the same, is truer than perhaps it should be. So, I mean, when you look around and you see all these things, as an educated person that are touted as new ideas or new approaches, and you realize, this is not new. This is not much different. I mean, there's not much progress made in ethics since Aristotle. Really, they're just variations on a theme, um, and so I think to be grounded in the classics is to just give you an awareness of this, trajectory of where we come from as a species, at least I mean, this would be true of all classics, whether they're Western, Greco-Roman classics or Confucian classics or, Sanskrit classics. So this notion of the past is informing the present, I think is, well, actually, G.K. Chesterton called it the democracy of the dead. So tradition is basically giving a vote to people who just don't happen to be walking around anymore, giving a vote by meaning like giving them a voice. So it doesn't mean you just like take it hook, line, and sinker. I mean, they were wrong about a lot of things, the ancients, but it's better to know what they were saying than not to know and think that you have like a new idea where it's not necessarily new, and they may have anticipated all the problems back then. I mean, you read Thucydides, he's still an apt political scientist, theorist that is all too relevant today. So, the Princeton series is really good for that because they're bringing people who, they're historically, the scholars who are translating them are very historically minded. They're not pandering. They're not, dumbing it down. They're making accessible, all the complexities of the past, the topics that they write about, and they're repackaging for a modern audience. I think it's really useful.
Yeah, I agree. So I'll just play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
There is a story we are given in the modern world. So you have these two books, How to Care About Animals and How to Be a Farmer. And they're both drawing from the ancients about two things that we care about animals almost primarily as a growing urbanite population globally. There are more human beings living in urban and suburban environments now than in rural. So there's more city dwellers, and the only animals city dwellers are exposed to are, rats, raccoons, possums, scrub birds, the occasional migrating whatever, and then cats and dogs and whatever you keep in your environment. Right. Why to care about animals, how to care about animals, has the urban modern world sort of drifted from these ancients, and this isn't going to come back. The thing you're doing where you're like, I'm homesteading, we're growing flowers, we're raising animals, we're living with them. This is not going to be the experience for the vast majority of human beings. It feels like in the modern world.
Right. Well, okay, fair enough. I mean, there is no going back, and there's no Eden to return to. And I'm not under any illusion that there is. We consider ourselves like really fortunate to be able to live on 100 acres and have this lifestyle. That there is still space in the world that this can happen. So we're very fortunate. But the motto of the city of Chicago, which is your time zone, I think, right now, is Urbs in Horto. A city in a garden, Urbs in Horto. And the reason is because, it's got a lot of green space, and there are a lot of, within the city limits, there's a lot of Washington Park, downtown. And that notion is, I think, also, evocative of mental landscapes that, you don't have to live out on the farm to have an appreciation for nature. The tree that's growing in your backyard is just as precious and just as important as the forest out in the forest primeval, or the tree in the forest primeval. So that's a false dichotomy that there's pristine, untouched or somehow rural landscape, and then there's the urban. I mean, there is that for sure. But we can, make rural the urban to a greater degree. We can, and it's very much how you think about the world, whether you're a conservationist or, farming in many ways is a state of mind. The ethos of farming, you can have that in the city.
So I like that. I feel the blurring because I think there is a sense. I think there's always a sense of divisiveness, and we see in the ancients there was serious division between the people in the rural world and the people living in the city. This was a serious problem thousands of years ago, and it remains this problem where people feel like one group doesn't understand the other group. Yeah. And I think in your introductions to these works inside How to Care About Animals, and then you told me to read the afterword to Plato's Pigs, which I did.
Good.
It's kind of this. Maybe an idea that this idea of ecology, just like you said, nature is around us. It's us becoming blind to it and us not thinking about how we're fitting into it at any moment. The mindset that is the problem, and not necessarily the fact that you're not in the forest. You don't need to return to the forest primeval to have a full appreciation for how you connect to nature's web.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. William Cronin wrote a great piece, The Trouble with Wilderness, back in the 90s, mid-90s, where I think the subtitle is Getting Back to the Wrong Nature. And he basically argues that, human beings are a part of nature. We use it. We are integral to it. I mean, there isn't a separation, a meaningful one. You can't. So the question becomes a question of proper integration, of wise use, prudent use of nature. And again, that can be practiced anywhere. Whether you're actually farming and you're a pasture manager, or whether you're, living in the city and choosing where to get your food, or you have an allotment and you're growing as much food as you can, or how much money, a school board puts into, that kind of programming for its students in the inner city, which is totally possible, instead of building another, whatever it is, parking lot, So these things are all possible. It's definitely a state of mind.
Okay, and let me just continue to play devil's advocate and be modern cynical, not ancient cynical, about the fact that individual choices about how we care for animals and the relationship we have for animals and how we care for the water and the air and the trees around us is often presented as individual. So you have the power to do something. You individually can recycle. You individually can buy locally grown produce. But the great big warping effects of kind of mankind's ability to do whatever we want on Earth feels like it's far more powerful than any individual choice. And so I wonder if you kind of on your acreage and kind of having a space where you can kind of craft a space for yourself, but still see the world warped in ways by humanity. And this is where I think it'll get to the book. Humanity has this endless way of just creating new wants and needs. And there are a couple of things I want to talk about in How to Care About Animals that specifically address humanity's need to do this.
Right.
We just imagine things we want, and then we go out in the world and we take whatever we want, and we don't really see how those choices carry consequences. And even if we see it, I individually see it. If I don't have that much power, I don't own a company, I don't run a country, I can't choose which direction the military goes. How do you ethics today feel even more fraught and complicated than they ever did thousands of years ago about how much power do I actually have in this great global economy and world?
Right. No, that's a really good question. And it does boil down to power. I mean, obviously I've opted for a sort of a quietistic approach to it. So, those who can do, those who can't teach. I guess I do both. But again, I think we're lucky that we're able to do what we do. But as you say, there are plenty of people who don't have the means or the power or and believe me, our farm is a hard scrabble farm. There's no trust fund here. Everything was pay as you go. So I don't want you to get the wrong impression. It's not like we didn't work hard to have it, and what we have is pretty modest. 1,000-foot square house is not very big. But it's a lot bigger than the apartments most people live in. So everything that you say is true, and the powerlessness. But on the other hand, this idea of I don't know. I've been reading Peter Kropotkin lately. I'm teaching a course on utopias next semester for the first time, so I'm preparing for it. And so I'm reading I read The Conquest of Bread, and the anarchist argument about ownership is really quite profound. It's not unlike the argument that I just mentioned about like the tradition or traditions plural, being like the democracy of the dead. The anarchist says, like, private property is a fiction, because anything that you own, you happen to possess at any one time, is been molded by, thousands of hands over centuries, whether it's a piece of land or it's an actual house that you bought. Even if you built the house, somebody made the stuff or processed the stuff that goes into the house that you built. So this idea of being connected to a long line of people who have gone before you is very real. I mean, it's real, but it's also a realization you have to think about that. Now, again, it doesn't solve the immediate problem when you are powerless in a society that's run by people who are exercising power over you.
Sure.
But it's something that is the fact. I mean, it is the case, and it is empowering to think that way about the world, and that we're kind of temporary tenants of what we have, and this idea of a commons, and that we're stewards, or all this. It's a very old idea, but it's one that can maybe resuscitate our attitudes towards everything, including power, material possessions and power.
So that mindset, it's interesting. We would think something affected, if we're setting up a political spectrum, the anarchists are oftentimes on the far left, and yet that idea you're sharing is, of course, something that is pulled from very conservative small c, that is pulled from the right, where they're looking to the old. So both the far left and saying we want to focus on the ancient indigenous culture here, or the anarchists saying everything you own is not yours because it's passed through all these hands that weren't you. On the other side, they're like, no, we've got to preserve these legacies and preserve how this mindset sounds like it can properly help people anywhere on the spectrum in any situation to appreciate where things you didn't bring into being in this world, or even if you did bring them into being, other people helped bring them into being through the centuries and millennia.
Yeah. I mean, I find that I think about that more and more about everything, from what I'm writing and what I'm doing, and it gives you a sense of feeling connected. It's this, and again, feeling connected is empowering, because it's not just a fiction, it's not just a feel good thing. It's just like it's factual, it's actual, and if you realize that and act upon it, and a lot of people realize that and act upon it, it will change the way we relate to one another, and ultimately politically, but even just in a community setting as well. So,
okay, that's perfect, because now I want to bring a quote that I pulled right out of the afterword to Plato's Pigs, where you write, quote, "Everything is interconnected is no quaint statement or source of spiritual solace," which it sounds like the idea that we're all connected to these generations. It is, rather practically speaking, a terrifying prospect. And in that case, to be fair, you are talking about a sort of ecological disaster. So if we're interconnected to everything and we're wrecking the environment, this is horrifying to realize that every choice I make could be damaging to the future. But this interconnectedness, I think it gives a lot of solace. But then the other side is, I guess, that panic, the terrifying prospect that the things I do are connected to these things and I could be causing damage.
Yeah, well, it's a great responsibility. So, and not enough people think about the responsibilities and obligations we have to the environment and to one another. I mean, we definitely do not consider that enough. So, is it a good idea to cut those trees down that are near that wetland there, where they're serving a good purpose now? And if I do that for any reason, what do I owe back for doing that? What was their purpose in the first place? So do I plant other trees and other species that will be good to mitigate erosion or whatever, mitigate the wetland that's there? But so it's that second thought, and that notion of giving back too, when you do need to take, because just by being in the world, that's part of the notion of the interconnectedness. You cannot help but do harm. I mean, you can strive all you want to do no harm, but you're not going to be able to live a life free of, trammeling, pristine nature or bugs under your feet, or
right.
or taking life to live. So in the face of that, because you can't avoid it, what's the proper ethical response? well, I think I can't remember if I talk about it in the afterword to that book, or
Yeah.
I think it's earlier in that book. But Albert Schweitzer, unlikely suspect, argued that the proper ethical response is to give back as a sort of an obligation. Give back in every form that you can give back, and that keeps it going. It's just like giving back to the soil when you take something from it. You can't do that forever. That's like just science. You just can't do it. So you have to bring the nutrients back that you've taken away. So that seems like a good ethical principle for living generally to me. Yeah. So, but it's also part of that being interconnected. I mean, you really don't have a choice. It's only under with the delusion that you think you can be separate, or you can just like take and not give back. That's a mistake.
So you'll have to tell me, because I haven't read How to Be a Farmer yet, but I have read, except for the last bit on where your last writer in How to Care About Animals is really going to make an argument for vegetarianism, which I agree with the argument for vegetarianism already. So I'm like, if I have to skip one thing, I'll skip the last essay till later before this interview. So I read the rest of it. Thinking about animals, the responsibility, that example you gave of the wetlands, if I own the wetland and I own the lawn and the trees next to it, I think in many mindsets, we are led to understand, well, my responsibilities are to the law and the community and the other people. And if other people don't care in this area what I do,
right,
then there's no repercussion to human beings. It doesn't matter. And even with all the ecological and animal-minded and Mother Nature-minded stuff, I think a lot of times our inclination by nature as our species is to think of ourselves first. And so if we're harried or stressed or we're just not thinking, is it going to hurt anybody? No. Well, then I'm done. I mean, so I don't care. I don't owe anything to the wetland. If I want the trees out, I want the trees out. It's my property. It doesn't hurt anybody. Nobody cares.
Oh yeah, no, that's the American way. I mean, that is it. I mean, that's the right right to liberty, freedom, and happiness, all of that sort of stuff. Right. And where it's very short-sighted. I mean, even that experiment is pretty young. 200 years plus.
Yeah.
This whole experiment won't last forever, and so thinking to the seventh generation, you probably heard that sort of indigenous mantra of you should take action now with a view to the seventh generation from now.
Okay.
It's not ill-founded. I mean, again, these things can be trite and they can sound new agey, but it's important. It's important now more than ever, because now we see the consequence. We're actually living with the consequences of climate change, which has been caused by the honeymoon of the last 50 years of explosion of use of fossil fuels, and with no consequences, all abiding by the law, some of it not, but much of it totally legal and fine. And so we need to change. You really have to change the structures of society to operate within. So some of this social cooperation and cooperation with nature is going to need to be coerced, through the long arm of the law or the changing of laws. But it's got to start also with attitudes and mentalities. So who knows? I'm not necessarily hopeful, but what you described is the paradigm. It's in Vermont, we say there's a sort of a saying you see on bumper stickers. I'm a Vermonter, I do what I wanna. And the idea is that, that in many people's minds is liberty.
Right.
But it's,
That's some real. I feel like the Texans also have that same thing. It's like a sense, that freedom is our highest thing. But like again, in I think many religions teach this. All the freedom you get is always in service or mixed in yin yang with responsibility. So if, again, from the very heart of the Bible, you get freedom, but then there's responsibility that comes with it. These things come hand in hand. You don't get freedom. You don't get to do what you wanna without also thinking about all the things you can't do when you wanna. Like there's just...
Exactly. No, I couldn't agree more. And, are there things that somebody could tell me, obviously there's a, what people will come back and argue is that you don't want, Big Brother telling you what to do, what you can and can't do on your land. And that's true to a degree. but it's not absolutely true, and it has to be, basically these sorts of laws and strictures and regulations need to be informed by, science, and with public welfare in mind, and which includes, of course, the welfare of the environment, nature.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, well, I love I don't subscribe to everything from Stoicism, but I love the ideas of Stoicism in the same way as Buddhism. And this is your own fault. So you put a letter from Seneca into How to Care About Animals.
Oh, good.
In it, he talks about it's just a few pages, and he talks about unnecessary luxuries, and he uses animals as an example. Animals don't need it. We cause problems for ourselves because we want all these things and we think we need them. But look at the animals. They get what they need. And then a few selections later, you have Plutarch, who has the comedic back and forth about a man turned into a pig. Right. And the guy's like, hey, I talked to Circe and I'm going to get all you guys turned back into people. And the pig's like, hold on. Did you ask us? Because I don't think we want to become. Right. And in his like happy comedic philosophical argument, he presents, you've got these desires, and the desires are neither natural nor necessary. And that's what he says the problem becomes. Us animals, our desires are natural and necessary, and you humans, not just are they unnecessary, but then you start coming up with these desires that are just completely unnatural. I don't even know where you get it. Both of these arguing, Seneca and the pig from Plutarch, arguing that a major problem is that you want things, whether you have been led to believe you want them by other people, consumer culture, or your family modeling for you and saying, this is what a proper family does, this is what a human being needs. We have this infinite capacity to dream up new things to want. If you look at the trees and they're annoying to you, is the answer a Stoic answer of, are the trees really annoying? How annoying? Are they really, how much are they bothering you? Right. You might wisely weigh it out. Do I really want that change? Do I want to go cut down the trees? I don't know. Where do you put those in there? Clearly, in thinking about animals, we get a vision of what is absolutely necessary to survive. And then we look at our lives and think, I have all these luxuries that make things comfortable. So what are your thoughts on how that plays out in the animal examples of How to Care About Animals?
So in that Seneca passage, what I see in that, it's letter 60, I think, and when I first encountered that letter, I wasn't thinking along these lines, but since then I've discovered the work of Jakob von Uexküll, who was a Baltic German biologist, and he was. You
name drop him in the afterword on Plato's Pigs.
I do. Okay. Well, he talks about he developed this concept called Umwelt, which in German just simply means environment, but he meant it in a specific way that every organism on the planet lives in its own bubble, its own universe, where space and time are relative to that organism. So he gives many examples, and it's all properly. It's empirical science. It's not just hypothetical, and not just philosophical. It's biological. He basically invented the field of biosemiotics. But he uses the tick as an example. So the tick, has no eyes and ears, and it can go 18 years without feeding, and it's only kind of prompted to act or to set in motion by the presence. By it's perceiving the presence nearby of butyric acid, which is something that mammals excrete from their glands. So the tick senses that, and I don't even want to say smells it. I'm not sure that it has a sense of smell, but it's a chemical stimulus that causes it to drop from its perch, land on the animal. At that point, another stimulus takes place, sets afoot, and it starts to. It's a tactile stimulus that the tick runs around on the hair of an animal until it finds a bald spot. Now, then it stops running around when it finds a spot where it can actually latch in. And then it's not the tactile experience anymore. It's a heat signal that actually impels it to bore. Now, I know you're a veterinarian. I don't know if you know about ticks.
Not a veterinarian, but work with veterinarians. Yeah.
You do work with veterinarians. So, and bites into the mammal and then feeds, lays its egg, and dies. And that's the world of the tick. Now, every animal tells a similar story. So of all the hundreds of stimuli that are radiating from a mammal's body, your body, my body, when we're out for a walk, only those three activate a tick to do anything. So its Umwelt is that bubble. And the truth is that all animals have that kind of limited bubble, and with their own stimuli and their own reaction to it. So that letter from Seneca, I think, is interesting. He's saying like animals know what they need, and they operate within those parameters naturally. They don't try to live outside of their bubbles. Well, the human being has a problem. We have not only do we just have like a physical bubble and physical stimuli, but we have this problem called consciousness or reason or whatever you want to call it. They called it that, gives us a horizon of either expectation or projection into the future of possibilities, needs and wants and desires that fall outside of a natural or physical Umwelt. But because reason is part of human beings' Umwelt, according to the Stoics, we need to exercise it properly to be able to live within our means. And according to the Stoics, you probably are familiar. They would say that we act irrationally. We act against our interests because we don't exercise our reason properly in dealing with emotions and needs and wants and desires. So I find that's a really useful concept. And animals can. I think Seneca in that letter is saying animals can teach us about living within the compass of our means because they do it naturally. It's harder for us, but we do it poorly compared to animals. Animals do it by instinct. They do it, unless there's something wrong with the animal, it doesn't do it. But otherwise, it'll do it. Guaranteed, it's going to act a certain way. We're not talking about machines either. We're talking just about, responding to, an environment correctly and appropriately and effectively for survival, for flourishing.
There's this never-ending conversation throughout all of humanity where once we start writing things down, there's this huge question of whether this reason is a good thing or a bad thing. And probably the correct answer is it's both a good and a bad thing, or right. It's neither. It's like, is it good or bad that a tick can detect that acid? Well, in some cases, for some animals, it's probably bad. We wish it didn't detect that acid. The ticks weren't around. We wish we didn't have them. We struggle with our reason. We want to tame it. We say it's the most wonderful thing. It makes us better than all the animals. And the other respect, then you have these examples you give in How to Care About Animals, where you have these people either speaking for animals or looking at animals or saying this reason's not all it's cooked up to be. It causes us all this problem. So overall, in How to Care About Animals, if you look at how it's thought of, how reason is thought of, do you think overall you feel like the ancients are extolling reason? It's the best thing about us. Or is it a bit of a curse, the way it's presented in the very beginning of Genesis, or the way Plutarch and Seneca talk about this reason really causes us difficulties?
Yeah, well, I think it's a question of exercising it correctly, okay. And that's why they're all concerned about the proper use of reason and using reason, to control the appetitive part of our nature. So, Plato's tripartite soul, or the Logos principle from everywhere from Heraclitus to the Stoics. I think it's indispensable, but it just needs to be exercised properly to know what it is. And that's where the ancients would say philosophy comes in, and, defining terms and, what is X. And so it's not a given. It's not natural, maybe even unnatural to kind of recover it, because it is a kind of a struggle with our wants, needs, desires, emotions to know what's right. But then be willing to act on what's right once we think we know what it is.
Okay, this is probably unfair. I only have a few more minutes with you, and I'm going to dump what I think is it's not a big philosophical question, but one of the neat things about this series, and there are now dozens of books in this series, is they present the way what are those green volumes that classicists always have, where half of it's in the Latin and half...
The Loeb.
The Loeb, thank you, the Loeb editions, and there's many of them.
Yeah, published by Princeton's nemesis, Harvard.
Oh, okay. So what is this? Princeton's like, ooh, we can do that too. It presents Greek on one side and English on the other, and Latin on one side and English on the other. So knowing Hebrew, coming to Judaism, and having that unlocked, it's now necessary. If you're tourist, it's really irritating just to have the English translation. But for many of us, and nobody knows the Latin, and certainly almost nobody knows the Greek. When you go in and think about, I'm presenting this thing, Does it feel, what to you is the nice part for a book, as opposed to Loeb, which is presented as this is a scholarly one that the classicists will use to work
Right.
on?
Right.
These books are presented as just their popular press stuff. Why have the foreign language in there?
Right. My view. I'm not speaking for the publisher per se, but it's a visual parody that is very effective, and it's sort of like what Princeton's publishing in this series is like the Benetton of Loeb's. So you'll notice the colors. The covers are all different colors.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
They're not just red for Latin and green for Greek. The translations are they aim to be lively and in modern idiom, so they meant to be accessible. Translations in the true sense, not just translationese, but representing material fairly based on what the Greek and Latin actually says.
Right.
And it also has that kind of self-help aspect to it that you surely have noticed. Everything is how to.
Yeah.
And how many books are how-to books. So it's the idea that it has some sort of practical, instrumental value to the human being who's reading it, rather than, and they look great on the shelves. As my wife says, I've done 4 of them now, so they're up there. I will have done 4 of them. They're up there, and they're all different colors, and they're nicely produced. But
okay, yeah.
But I mean, there are people who are interested in the Greek and the Latin, or they're interested in it because they had it in high school or something. They had Latin in high school, so it's a chance for them to, check a word or see a phrase, be reminded of something, and that has value.
And one of your first footnotes that I looked up, again, presents a problem that occurs in Hebrew all the time, which is you translate a Hebrew word, you have to pick an English word to mean it. But the problem is that word means 4 or 5 different things. And so there is no possible way to translate it properly in the new language. How do you dealt with that some way in footnotes? If you thought it was so important, you're like, you should know this word they use also can mean this and also has a flavor of this, but that just can't come across in the translation. So how do you translate?
Yeah, I think the passage you might be referring to is that short bit about the octopus in Diogenes.
That is absolutely, yes.
And of course, because that's a poem, that's poetry. It's province. It's part and parcel of poetry that words. You stretch the meaning of words, or you play with the meaning of words, and words have connotations, and poets are aware of them, and they choose them for that reason often. So. That needed a footnote there. But on the other, in general, when you're translating, this is my view, I guess, you're translating ideas. You're not translating words. You're not even translating phrases and sentences. And if I think there's any I don't know, demerit in modern translations of ancient works is it's when they try to be literal.
Okay.
Like there's really no such thing as a literal translation. I mean, if there is, you wouldn't want to read it. I wouldn't recommend reading it. You want somebody who is familiar enough with the original language to be able to literally translate, carry over the meaning of what the author is saying to in an idiom that makes sense now, rather than representing each and every word that's there. I mean, that does have its purpose, but if you want to get to that level of study, you should learn the original language. My view. I mean, and you will want to if your concern is that kind of exactitude. So translation is just never makes everybody happy. Somebody's going to quibble about this, that, or the other, but on the whole, if you approach it with the idea that you're translating ideas primarily, words secondarily, you're on firmer footing and you're going to be more effective.
Okay,
that's just me.
Having read the translation for How to Care About Animals, they're wide ranging. And so again, I know a lot of people like animals. And so I think it's a great book, an example of, you try to include examples of naturalists and philosophers who are observing animals and are really excited about them. So I think people who love animals can attend to that. And you include the fables and allegory stuff where animals get used as examples of us. And if you use an animal, it just hits you in a different way. And that's what the author's doing. They're trying to hit you from a different direction. Instead of saying the great emperor, whatever, did this to the other emperor, it's like, well, the dog did this to the cat. And it just hits differently. It gets the message across differently. So I thought it did a nice job of covering the entire menu of ways that the ancients kind of talk about animals. So Kudos, I liked it.
Well, thanks for noticing that, because that was the goal: is variety is the spice of life, and keep things interesting. So I did want to have variety there. And so when you read the Porphyry at the end, boy,
Yes.
translation becomes, when you definitely, it's a question of translating ideas. That was a very hard passage to translate because it's very thick. The Greek is very crabbed. It's not very elegant. There's a lot of borrowed, almost like wholesale stolen phrases from Aristotle and from Plutarch in there. And it's hard to know where the stolen stuff and the original, the Porphyry's own voice begins. So it was hard to translate, but the ideas are very, very compelling, even if the packaging in the Greek is not. My view. Pliny's the same way. Pliny can be a real, terrible text to read.
You did call that out, and I thought that was helpful, and I felt you could feel it. I read Xenophon and Herodotus and Thucydides, and I forget and then something came out. There was some Roman historian, and he's like, don't expect him to be as good. And I'm like, he was not as good. You could just tell from the translation, the sentences weren't as good. The word choice was, and things were repetitious or didn't make sense. And there was no way the translator can't fix that. Like, that's just, it was in the original.
Right. You kind of tweak it as best you can, but you can't misrepresent it and make it something that it's not. That would be not true. But but you can tweak it if you can. Go ahead.
Last question. What do you hope people take away? If people read How to Be a Farmer, How to Care About Animals, if they have an encounter with ancients on things that are around them all the time or things they think about all the time, what do you most hope people pull away from that?
No. I mean, don't discount something just because it's old. I mean, Thoreau has this great little comment in Walden where he says, well, people don't want to study the classics because they're old and outdated. But then he says, well, you might as well not study nature because he's old, right? Nature's been around a long time. And when you think about, I think the past is ever so much with us. It's part of our genetic memory, biologically speaking, and culturally speaking, notionally speaking, it's also similar. It's like part of our cultural DNA to know the past. And I'm talking not just the Greco-Roman past. I'm talking about the pasts of humanity: Indigenous, Confucian, Buddhist, Sanskrit, Islam. All these things inform our current ways of thinking, and they're not necessarily all compatible, but they're all important and deserve our attention.
Okay, well, I do like the fact then that you open with that very short bit from Aristotle, where he's sort of justifying the study of, you think animals are dumb, we can do whatever we want, there's nothing interesting about studying them. Well, let me tell you. He presents this short thing. Yeah.
That's a great example. That's an instance of exactly what I'm talking about. It teaches you about being a human to study animals, in many ways, he suggests. I love that passage. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah.